to another episode of Don't Believe Jack. It's me, Jack Michelle. I'm here, present. Uh, Note that I'm present. And I'm doing groovy. I hope you are doing groovy as well. A lot of stuff is bubbling up. And yeah, I hope things are going well. I I this week I stayed up until very to the wee hours of the morning, listening because I found out that on my Echo Show slash Amazon listening device, I could listen to BBC World Service, which is incredible because it's just like it's all these crazy, interesting stories from around the world, which gets me super duper excited. I love learning more about what's going on around the world, and it delivers. Like literally, it was like I went from a story about like Hong Kong protesters to a music festival that's going on in the UK, and an interview with like a former child soldier turned rapper to just this everything. It was crazy, and I was so excited and sort of like to use Ruth Bader Ginsburg's terminology, turned on, not sexually, just physically turned on by it all that I couldn't go to sleep. I was just like, oh my god, this world, it's incredible. It's like full of all these amazing things. And like there was a story about like someone innovating in like crops. There was a an interview with the guy who invented daily contact lenses, and it talked about how basically the BBC actually played a role in this guy being able to get funding in 1990, and it talks about his sort of story of bringing daily contact lenses to the world, and it was just nuts. It was just so like just so many odd, interesting stories, things happening all over the world all the time that totally go unnoticed by me. It's quite incredible. Um, I had this really funny experience where like the world's just like full of all this stuff, and like we're living around it constantly, and we like ignore or disregard most of it. But it's truly truly incredible that like people around the world like have entirely different experiences uh, than I do. I remember I had I sometimes like write little like gratitude lists of things that have been done for me. I use it to sort of wrap up the end of the day and sort of bookend the day. Start the day with a little bit of like meditation and prayer, and then at the end of the day I wrap it up with like thinking with like thanking things that were done for me. And I went on this trip, right? I took a trip to the East Coast, and when I got to my parents' place, it was just awkward. I hadn't seen them in like a year and a half, and it felt a little weird. Uh, and I was just like a little anxious, a little like I don't know what's going on. Are we supposed to like have fun immediately, or am I just like here? And I just and also just being tired from a trip, right? And a little bit restless. And so I opened up my notebook and I just started writing everything that I received in that day, and it was insane when I thought about it. Like here, let me pull it up. Um, have it in this notebook. I'll just read it to you. What did I receive? I received a airplane ride. Um, you answer three questions when you do an icon. You answer three questions. So one of them is what did I receive, what did I give, and where did I cause difficulty? And it just in terms of what I received, I wrote airplane ride. So that means that you had to have like a crew. You had to have pilots who got trained, the people who support those pilots, like their family members, the crew, the ground crew that serviced the airplane, the airline for having the airplane, the stewardesses, and the stewards. I don't know what you call them these days. The airplane attendants, and all those people and their families, and I got because I was in I guess a seat that one of the airline attendants said was bad, she gave me a complimentary sandwich. The sandwich was delicious. That sandwich was made somewhere. Someone baked that bread. Someone picked the lettuce. Someone picked the tomatoes. An animal, a turkey was killed so I could have the meat. It was just, I just thought about it. It's just all those things. On the plane, I watched a Trevor Noah special. Trevor Noah had to write all that material. A team of people had to record the special for him. The audience provided laughs and like context. There were lighting people, there were music people, there were sound people, there were recording people who created the special. Because of Netflix, I was able to get it on my phone. I have a phone because smartphones became a thing because of a team of designers. Samsung made my particular one, but then Steve Jobs made all of these, like he sort of started smartphones, and that can happen because of the internet. Also, on the way to get to LAX from my place, I took the train to a bus to the airport. So I had to get on that train. There was someone driving the train. There was someone driving the bus. There was someone who took my money for the bus. Someone checked me in because of my phone. I could look up, the transportation directions from my place to the train station to the bus. I also was able to pull up my ticket on my phone. When I was on the plane, I listened to music from Spotify. The music was recorded by, the artist, and Spotify like aggregated it and gave me a way to store it offline. I was reading a book from the library on the plane by Gabor Mate. When my brother picked me up, first of all, my brother drove out to National Airport to pick me up. When I landed in Virginia, he picked me up in our parents' car. When I got home, when I got to my parents' house in Virginia, my parents gave me food and water and offered me stuff. I watched a little bit of soccer with my dad that was delivered through Verizon. I watched a fight video, like a boxing match video on all the best fights, which is hosted on YouTube. Just all that stuff, like just all the things that I got were pretty incredible, and it's totally connected to all these other things around me. So I don't know. It's just like those experiences. I feel like they're connected for me, at least for me. It's like if I listen to something like BBC Radio, it's like I think about, oh, what's going on around the world, right? And then similarly, I think about all the things and that was just one day, and I was like, okay, well, I guess that was a pretty good day. No one needs to hear me. Plenty was done for me. A lot of kindness was done for me. Even things I paid for, which I think is an interesting thing that the book, The Nikon, sort of suggests, to consider that even things you pay for, you're still giving someone something. And if someone does something for you because you pay for it, well, they're still doing it for you, even if you're paying for it. That certainly, I think that mentality and that attitude has a way of breaking through the modern idea, which maybe is related to capitalism or Adam Smith, that if you pay for someone for something, you're not really appreciating them. It's just an exchange. And it's like, well, there can still be appreciation in mutually beneficial exchanges because you needed someone to exchange with. Sure, they're getting value, but the fact of their existence and their presence and their willingness to engage in trade with you is a positive thing in and of itself, right? I realize that when I leave things I pay for out of the equation of the things I receive. Like if I pay for a sandwich, then that doesn't count as me receiving the sandwich. I realize I cut out a lot of the goodness in my life. So I don't know, just an interesting thought, or I mean, interesting that I'll let you be the judge of that. But yeah, I don't know. It's just exciting, like to hear about so I also want to talk about like we've been reading more books about like business and entrepreneurship, and it's just fascinating. And I mean, it's sort of in the line with the guy who invented the daily contact lens. He worked at a contact lens company, and he basically said he was trying to figure out. He was like convinced that there was a cheaper way to make contacts, and basically proposed it to the executives at the contact company he was working at, and they were like, we don't think this will work, and B, if you create daily contacts, we us won't be able to offer cleaning supplies. We're going to lose a lot of money there because that's how we make a lot of our money. And so he quit. He decided to quit and started a production process, not a factory, but like simply started experimenting with contact lenses and saw if he could make them cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And he spent like 2.5 years on this. It took him much longer, I think, than he expected. And he couldn't get any funding or interest initially. He presented to places, people really didn't believe in the concept. Because at that time, apparently, making a contact lens cost like 50 pounds. And after checking his calculations, he was able to make like a contact lens for, I think he said 40 pence, right? So it's zero point 0.4 pounds. Like and when he first did the numbers, he was like, he rechecked it because he was like, it cannot be that cheap. I must have made a mistake in my calculations, but he didn't. And people were still like unwilling to fund it. They just didn't. I think people were like, "There's no appetite for this. No one's gonna go for this. No one's gonna want it. It affects other parts of our business, and we don't really want to disrupt those parts of our business." All this really, really interesting stuff. And he was just doing this at home. I mean, I think he was in his 50s or his 60s at this point. Which is also fascinating, right? Because oftentimes, I think when I think of an entrepreneur, I think of someone like, I think of like someone in high school. But the idea that, well, this guy's got like a ton of experience as an engineer, and now he's able to bring it to bear on like a problem, and he's got enough money and security to like make that happen. Just remember, this is like before the finance days of like VC and stuff, and even then, they're investing in like tech, which probably has many, maybe perhaps more multiples, than or bigger returns given the money you put in versus something like contact lenses. I don't know what the market and the prices and all that stuff looks like for contact lenses. But anyways, yeah, I just thought it was just a fascinating story, and finally, I think the BBC covered him, and then someone reached out for him to present his product. I think it was in London, and present the product, and so he went there and like pitched it, and they said, okay, well, we'll take 250,000 of them. And then he had to like build a factory and go through all that stuff. And I'm like, man, that is so much. It's also like incredible when you realize like if he built that thing, like that's so much work, right? Like it's not the same as like sitting at a desk and like receiving assignments and then doing them and then sending them back. It's like there's so many other things that you need to do to be productive in this process, and it's crazy. It's just nuts. So I thought that was just awesome. Um, I don't know. It's sort of in that same vein. Like technology is really interesting. Like when I recently saw my nieces and nephew, and it was funny. It wasn't that big. I mean, it was nice to see them, but it wasn't like astonishing because I can do like video calls with them, right? And those video calls, like if we can spend as much time as we want together. It's free. It's not like maybe in the '90s. It's like the only way to be in touch with them would be a long distance call, and they can't see my face. And if you're 3, that conversation over the phone isn't going to be that interesting, right? But if you're 3 and I can see your face and you can see my face through an Echo Show, we can make faces at each other. We can just, I can hear them talk. They don't even have to look or make eye contact with me. They can be distracted. But if I'm looking at them, I still feel engaged and connected with them. So it's really great. It's just really, it feels nice to have all these technological comforts. When I saw them, it was more like, it wasn't like seeing someone I'd never seen, or being like, oh my God, you're so big now. It was like, no, 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 they looked exactly how I thought they were going to look. And I think I looked exactly how they thought I was going to look, right? And they went back to their toys immediately. Maybe that's the downside. They went back to their toys immediately, and I went back to my books immediately. but we just had that level of familiarity that I feel like technology makes possible. And I mean, there's a lot of things I don't like about technology, but I have to say, like, that is incredible, right? Even with my parents, I do video calls with them, and so it's just not. It doesn't really feel like people are that far away. The people who I want to have close to me, they can be close to me. And that's so cool. The downside, of course, is that this still is a comedy podcast, technically. Um, but yeah, no. The downside, of course, is if you go on like Twitter, you have tons of people who you don't want close to you, very very close to you. So that is the flip side. But it really is all about how you use it. It's not a problem with what it is. You know, it's not the format that's the problem. It's how you use it. And yeah, so it was just, I don't know, it was just cool. Very very cool to explore all that stuff. And yeah, I don't know. Yeah, technology's pretty amazing. So I just read a book called the 80/20 Principle, and I thought it was fantastic because it basically gets at something that like I've done in my own life in the last 2.5 years, which is like, or a year and a half. Like essentially, what I've done is I like have been looking. I basically have been working this program, and in it, you're essentially looking at your life and like how it works, and it's like systems, and it's like, I guess what I'm trying to say that basically I learned is I was just not using my time effectively. Like I was not necessarily around the people I wanted to be around. Uh, I spent way too much time on things that I really weren't important to me. And I think that this book basically gets at the same idea. So the core idea is that 20% of your time produces 80% of your joy, or 20% of people in your life produce 80% of the joy, and 20% of the people in your life produce 80% of the problems. And it's not like a hard set rule, but he basically said the idea is that the inputs and the outputs are disproportionate, right? 20% of the things you lead to 80% of your results. And he says, I mean, he's not asking you to accept that as gospel. He's saying like examine your life and see what it looks like. And I read this book only last week, but over the last year I've been looking at the things that are drivers of joy for me, or enjoyment or progress, and I've mainly been looking at it through the lens of people and like interpersonal stuff. So, and I realized that like all these people that I was like frustrations with, or like long sitting resentments against, they were just people that if was honest with myself, I shouldn't have been around them. Should have had no business with them at all. It was actually the thing was, it was just a relationship that should have been ended, maybe a couple of years prior or something like that, right? It just went on too long, and I just sort of was in autopilot. And I think the book really gets at that idea, right? That I'm, this idea of like not accepting that life is flexible, right? And that we have choices, and that I have choices about who I spend my time with, and I have agency, and also like something Bob, and also I have discernment, right? Like you can actually figure out like, oh, that dating relationship didn't work for this reason. Okay, well, avoid situations that situation could come up again. There's a part, and I have to say, there's a funny part of me that is probably very influenced by like a Puritan work ethic or something. But it's the idea of like, if a situation is unpleasant, I should go even deeper into it, and I should work my way through it because I'm sure it'll build my character. And it's like, no, it'll build your frustrations. Um, One of the funny lines, and he said like, don't try to like fix all your problems, like, or your weaknesses. Just like, figure out what your strengths are and like keep playing to them, which is a funny idea, right? Because I feel like self improvement culture can suggest that message. Obviously, this book it's a business book. He was a former consultant at Bain and Company. He was at BCG. So it is a business book, but it's also just a book about like the person, And honestly, it was better than pretty much any self help book I've ever read, and I have read quite a few of those. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I can't recommend that book enough. It's pretty fun. It's a pretty short read. Um, but yeah, just being efficient with stuff was interesting. I guess I really like some of these business books, not even just for my own like career, but I realize like a lot of these concepts or ideas are applicable in totally different areas of life, which is dope. Which is like honestly like really really good to see. And you're like, oh, this is why people read all this stuff. And also, I can see that like, the joke I used to make was that like business books are like self help books for people in suits. And I said that sort of mockingly, but I think it's true, and I think that in a lot of cases they're better. Not all of them. I'm sure there's lots of bad business books out there, but I will say the ones that are good that I've read are very, very good, very, very good. So I can't really recommend those enough. And also, right, like in a lot of cases, I think these books are good because there are practical scenarios where people are able to test these ideas. Um, there's a few self-help books I'd recommend, but really not that many. I'd recommend a lot more like history books and a lot more business books in the diet of someone who's trying to figure out their life, which includes yours truly. Um, yeah, it just had like I think one of the big, I mean, the idea that you should pay attention to inputs and outputs. It's not exactly like you're going to get a 20/80 thing. It might be more like 30/70, or it might be more like, it might be more like 5 and 95, or 5% produces 80% of your results. So it also doesn't have to always add to 100. And the book gets into this. But I realized it was true for me, like, it was funny at the beginning of the year. Without having read this book, I did this thing where I wrote down my goals for the year, and I wrote down the names of all the people who I really care about, and the relationships that I want to deepen. And I basically said, after I wrote all those names, I wrote, and if you don't develop relationships with anyone else, it's fine. And honestly, I think that has, it was a small thing, but after I wrote it, I realized like because essentially it was asking myself, okay, what would make this year a success? Financially, socially, spiritually, whatever, right? Romantically. And I wrote a list of names in my social space. And I was like, okay, like it literally took, since then I think my life's been like so much simpler, because I realize I'm like, oh, I don't need, like, if I meet someone new, I don't need to make them my friend. I don't need to convince them that to be my friend. If we become friends, great. I'll add their name to the list. But I'm under no obligation to develop any more relationships. And in fact, I'd rather deepen the relationships I have rather than develop new ones. Um, and that was excellent. That was really, really good to hear. To hear myself, to hear from myself. It was really good, and I don't know, like it really did change things. Like I noticed, being in LA, people are very like superficial and flaky, and it bothers me less. It honestly bothers me less. If someone ghosts on me, it's not a big deal unless you're on my list. But if you're on my list, you're not ghosting me. I know that. So it's just funny. It's like honestly, it's so narrow. It's so narrowing in the sense that I can and narrowing in a good way, right? That I can focus on the things that are really good. I read, I think the 80/20 principle gets at the same idea. And I was reading another book recently that had a quote from this guy who's like he's one of these tech entrepreneur VC guys. But he said, I pick my friends. He basically said, I don't, I mean, this is his take. You can disagree. But I like the sentiment. He's basically said, I don't like to be friends. If I'm constantly finding myself in arguments with someone, I don't want to be friends with them. Is basically what he said, because he's basically said friendships are like compounding interest, right? Like at first there's the returns aren't that big, but the longer you go, the returns get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And he's basically like, if I get into a relationship with someone where it's like a disruptive and very jagged relationship, right? Like that messes with my returns. And it's not so right. It's all about quality, not quantity. Um, I just thought that that was a really great point. That it really is like friendships really are like compounding interest. I've been talking with like some friends, some people from college about stuff, and I realize like they know me on a very deep level, and they'll do things for me. They'll make time to speak with me that other people won't, right? And so I have to choose people who are. Yeah, I mean that sounds terrible. It's not really terrible to say, but you have to choose people who are like good resources, like good value, and that's not even cynical. Like one of my best buddies. Whenever I talk with him, like I just feel so excited. You know what I mean? Like I just want to jump up and down. I'm full of energy after talking with him, right? And some of the people I had to sort of let go out of my life, I realized like we were getting into arguments. They would blame me for stuff, and they'd go on about how this is terrible and that is terrible. They make fun of me, and I just realized like not even labeling it as like bullying or intimidation or you're insecure or whatever. I can really look at it dispassionately now and go like this is not a good investment. I don't know about for you, but for me this is not a good investment of my time. And this isn't going to lead anywhere good. I guess what I'm trying to say is, as over the last year and a half, as I've looked at stuff very closely, it's and in combination with studying more economics and finance now, I can see that like I have all these data points in my life, right? Like I just turned 36, so I have like 18 years as a child and 18 years as an adult, and so I have enough data points to basically say, okay, well that if you say this kind of comment to me now, then 5 years from now, the return is going to be, what's that? Fucking terrible, right? So like, let me just nip this in the bud right now. Let me just like end this relationship right now because it doesn't work, right? And then, or I could say, well, statistically speaking, right, like based on tracking these relationships and which ones have lasted and which ones have not, and that's literally what I did. I realized, like in my head, I started looking at like, well, what relationship yields something? And it doesn't have to yield money, but just joy, like happiness. I want to see this person. I want to talk with them. They give me encouragement or they expose me to ideas that allow me to improve my life versus the people that don't. And I can see like some very, very clear patterns. And now I'm like, instead of fighting that and being like, no, you're going to be a good Christian person, you're going to be a good understanding person, you're going to listen to everybody. I'm like, no, I don't want to hear that. This is not a good use of my time. And this, again, like based on my personal experience, this doesn't tend to end well. Once you start to see stuff like that, it's like it becomes very, very easy to drop things that aren't working. Whereas my tendency in the past is if something's not working, I just need to figure out how to make it work better. And now I have enough, like I said, I have enough data in my life of being like, I spent 18 years trying to make things that didn't work better work better. More than that, to be honest, right? So like, if it doesn't work, just let it go. And focus your energy on the things that do bring you joy and happiness. And that's what I'm trying to do now. And it's pretty neat. So it was something I was already doing intuitively, but to also see it sort of articulated in this book is a really, really great point. So, anyways, I should get going. This is going to be a short episode. Gotta head out, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.